Days after a mass shooting and stabbing spree by a California college student, a number of state lawmakers are pushing to make it more difficult for potential killers to get their hands on a gun. In California, state lawmakers are now considering a bill called Assembly Bill 1014. It would create a first-in-the-nation gun violence restraining order system similar to the way domestic violence restraining orders are issued. If passed, AB 1014 would allow people who are concerned about an individual who could potentially be violent to make a petition to law enforcement or even go directly to the courts. A judge would then have a full hearing and decide within 7 days whether to grant the restraining order. If granted, police could then temporarily seize any firearms the person already owned and add their name to a list of people prohibited from purchasing weapons. Meanwhile, in Chicago, a city so stricken by sporadic gun violence, some residents have taken to calling it Chirac, Mayor Rahm Emanuel has unveiled an ordinance that would essentially ban gun shops in 99.5% of the city. In January, a federal court judge struck down Chicago's ban on gun sales within city limits and gave Mayor Emanuel 6 months to come up with new rules. The new ordinance would require gun dealers to videotape sales and ban gun stores near schools and parks. And it would require a 72-hour waiting period for purchasing handguns and 24 hours for rifles and shotguns. That wouldn't do much to stop the flood of illegal guns into Chicago from nearby states with looser gun laws like Indiana. But supporters say the bill could help stop people from purchasing guns intended for criminals who can't legally buy them. Meanwhile, even in Massachusetts, a state with the nation's second lowest rate of gun-related deaths, state lawmakers are trying to clamp down on a 17% rise in firearm-related injuries between 1998 and 2011. A new proposal give local police expanded discretion to consider a person's suitability to own a gun. It would add the state to a national database for criminal and mental health background checks and require all private sales of firearms to be conducted in the presence of a licensed dealer. But the question is, can any of these laws, all in blue states, withstand the money and the lobbying power of the NRA? Joining me now, California State Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner, a co-sponsor of California's new gun violence restraining order bill. And I guess that's the first question, Representative. Does your bill have any chance against the NRA?
Joy, glad to join you. Yes, it does. California has a great history of excellent gun control laws that have been effective. And while we can never guarantee that any one particular one we introduce will be successful, I think in this case it's a good sense measure, and it would put in a gun violence restraining order. And actually, California is not the first state to have this. You mentioned Indiana. Indiana has a gun violence restraining order law. So does Connecticut and Texas.
Well, I want to show a map of states that, in addition to that, because I think we're accustomed to feeling people who are for gun control feel sort of totally defeated by the process. But this is a map of states, more than a dozen of them, that actually prohibit possession of firearms by domestic violence, misdemeanor, people who've been convicted of a misdemeanor for domestic violence. And there are 4 states that require abusers to surrender their firearms if they're convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor. California is on that map. As far as you're concerned, is there a new law, including the law that you're proposing, that would have stopped the shooting at UC Santa Barbara?
Well, in this case of Santa Barbara, the mother of the shooter had concerns. She was very, very fearful that her son was at risk to being violent, dangerous to himself and others. So she did contact the police. And the police, having limited tools themselves to do something, visited him, but he was in a calm state when they visited him, and he assured them that he, was just depressed, and basically at that point there was really not a lot they could do. Now, if the mother had access to a gun violence restraining order, and if she knew that he had been stockpiling guns, as we know now, and she did know, if she did know that he was making these credible threats of killing people, she could have gone to the court or law enforcement and asked for this temporary restraining order that would have allowed law enforcement to repossess his guns, again, temporarily, and put him on that list to not be able to purchase a gun. And at least it would have prevented his shooting deaths.
California State Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner, thank you for finally answering the question, what law could have potentially prevented this catastrophe? Wishing you the best of luck with your bill.
Thank you.